Walk into any room full of people over 60, a social gathering, an evening dinner party, a charity gala, or a weekend mixer. Stand near the edge of the room for just 15 minutes and observe what the men are doing. Watch which ones make a direct move across the floor. Watch which ones attempt to strike up that familiar high-stakes opening conversation with an attractive woman standing by the bar. If you had observed this exact same demographic 30 or 40 years ago, you would have witnessed an entirely different dynamic. Back then, there was movement, posturing, subtle competition, and continuous initiation. Today, something fundamental has shifted. The men simply are not approaching. They are not sitting back, because there are no remarkable or beautiful women in the room. They are not sitting back because their biology suddenly shut down the moment they cross their 60th birthday. And they certainly have not retreated out of bitterness, resentment, or quiet despair. They have stopped deliberately, calmly, and with absolute clarity. There was no grand announcement, no public protest, and no collective agreement. It is an organic, widespread psychological evolution. When you examine the 10 brutal truths behind this quiet withdrawal, you uncover something profound about what older men have learned over decades of trial, error, triumph, and exhaustion. You see how their relationship with time, peace, and identity has fundamentally transformed. Here are the 10 brutal reasons older men have stopped approaching women, and why this shift represents one of the most significant psychological realities of modern life. The first reason is that the risk and reward calculation has fundamentally collapsed. When a man is 25 or 30 years old, approaching a woman carries immense stakes on both sides of the equation. Rejection stings sharply because his identity is still under construction. But the potential reward feels almost limitless. The thrill of anticipation, the excitement of new chemistry, and the promise of romance make the anxiety completely worth enduring. The entire pursuit is fueled by a surplus of emotional energy and the belief that finding the right partner will solve the puzzle of his life. By the time a man reaches 65, both sides of that classic equation have radically transformed. Rejection barely registers anymore. It does not crush his ego, it does not keep him awake at night, and his recovery time is measured in seconds rather than days. But the perceived reward has changed even more dramatically. This does not mean connection has lost its value, but rather that men now clearly recognize the long, demanding chain reaction that a cold approach initiates. An approach is never just a simple greeting. It is an opening bid on weeks of texting, planned dinners, performative courtship, navigating complex emotional baggage, and the slow, often tedious process of discovering whether two lifestyles can actually coexist without friction. At this stage of life, men look at the sheer energy required to run that marathon and compare it to the likely return on investment. For the vast majority, the mathematics simply do not add up. It is no longer an intellectual calculation. It has become an instinctual understanding honed by decades of watching this script play out in real time. The second reason is the development of an almost instantaneous pattern recognition that makes most approaches feel pointless before they even take their first step. When you have spent more than 6 decades observing human behavior, you develop an internal library of archetypes, body language signals, and emotional frequencies. A man in his 20s does not possess this dataset. He has to run the experiment every single time just to discover the outcome. He has to approach, endure the awkwardness, go through the dates, and experience the disappointment firsthand, because he lacks the historical context to predict what will happen next. A man at 65 has already run that exact experiment hundreds of times across decades. He has seen the enthusiastic smiles that mask deep emotional unavailability. He has seen the charming opening conversations that lead directly to high-maintenance dynamics. He can look across a room and immediately read whether a person is genuinely open to human connection or merely looking for an audience to validate her social presence. Before he has taken 3 steps toward her, he already knows precisely how the next 6 months would unfold. This is not cynicism or defeatism, it is pure efficiency. It is one of the most liberating yet sobering advantages of age. He is no longer guessing. He is recognizing patterns. When you can see the ending of the movie in the opening 5 seconds of the trailer, you lose the desire to buy a ticket. The third reason centers on the reality that the social consequences of initiating an approach have become entirely unpredictable, and unpredictability at this stage of life is a price almost no wise man is willing to pay. The cultural and social norms surrounding dating and romantic pursuit have undergone a massive shift over the last 2 decades. The exact same opening line, delivered with the exact same tone and good intentions, can be received as charming by one person and deeply inappropriate or invasive by another. The modern social landscape offers very few clear boundaries, and the variables are largely outside of a man's control. While a younger man might be willing to navigate this minefield because the drive for validation or companionship outweighs the risk, an older man looks at the situation with profound pragmatism. Pragmatic men do not engage in games where the rules change without warning, and a simple misinterpretation carries the penalty of public embarrassment, social alienation, or reputational damage. These men have watched younger colleagues and peers navigate these blurred boundaries and suffer significant professional and social consequences for minor missteps. They have drawn a simple, logical conclusion: when the potential downside is unpredictable and socially costly, while the potential upside is modest at best, the only rational strategy is complete non-engagement. The fourth reason is that their hard-won peace of mind has become vastly more precious than any outcome a romantic connection could offer. This is the truth that tends to surprise outside observers the most. When a man has spent decades dealing with the intense demands of career competition, family obligations, marital stress, financial pressure, and the endless noise of societal expectations, reaching a state of genuine tranquility is monumental. If he has successfully built a life where his home is quiet, his daily schedule belongs entirely to him, his finances are stable, and his emotional state is steady, that peace becomes his most sacred possession. You truly do not understand how chaotic life has been until you finally experience true, uncompromised peace, and once you have lived inside that peace for a few years, the threshold for allowing anything or anyone to disrupt it becomes extraordinarily high. An approach at a party might lead somewhere enjoyable, or it might introduce emotional turmoil, competing demands, drama, and months of rebuilding the tranquility that was lost in the process. Most men in their 60s have already run that risk analysis. Protecting a peaceful sanctuary that took 4 decades of suffering to build is not a sign of emotional laziness. It is the ultimate expression of self-respect. They will not gamble certainty for a romantic, maybe. The fifth reason is that they have lived long enough and been burned enough times to understand what early enthusiasm actually means. In youth, when someone shows immediate interest, laughs at your jokes, and radiates warmth, you naturally assume that you have found rare compatibility. It feels like destiny. You invest your time, money, and emotional focus because you believe the foundation is rock solid. Decades of life experience teach you that early charm and courtship energy are often the least reliable indicators of genuine character. That bright, captivating warmth frequently belongs to the introductory phase of human interaction, disappearing the moment ordinary daily life sets in. Older men have experienced the painful cycle of investing months or years into someone who seemed perfect during the first 3 weeks, only to discover that underneath the performance lay incompatibility, unresolved trauma, or deep-seated resentment. This experience does not make a man paranoid. It makes him calibrated. He understands that genuine compatibility cannot be manufactured in a 20-minute conversation across a cocktail table. Knowing the sheer emotional and financial labor required to peel back those layers makes opening that book feel exhausting rather than thrilling. He has learned to deeply question his own momentary excitement, because he remembers all the times that same feeling led directly into a storm. The sixth reason is that the caliber of women they would genuinely respect and want to approach simply are not spending their time in conventional dating environments. The women who genuinely appeal to a grounded, mature man, women who are emotionally independent, intellectually rich, comfortable in their own skin, and living lives full of purpose, are rarely hanging around singles events, hotel lounges, or country club mixers, hoping to be pursued. These women are busy engaging deeply with the world. They are participating in serious outdoor expeditions, mastering new crafts, attending intensive seminars, running charitable foundations, or cultivating their personal passions. Once a man realizes this reality, he completely abandons the traditional venues of pursuit. He does not stop socializing, he simply stops hunting. Instead of scanning rooms and engineering awkward interactions, he devotes his energy to activities that genuinely interest him. If he happens to form a connection while working on a community project or attending a lecture series, that connection emerges naturally as an organic byproduct of shared purpose, not as a manufactured transaction. That organic posture feels authentic, dignified, and sustainable, whereas cold approaches feel increasingly artificial and antiquated. The seventh reason is that approaching a stranger fundamentally requires an act of performance, and older men have reached a point where they are completely finished with performing. Let us be entirely honest about what approaching someone requires. It demands curated body language, carefully modulated enthusiasm, calibrated wit, and a conscious effort to appear impressive within a 60-second window. It is an audition. A man who has spent 40 years performing in corporate boardrooms, client negotiations, family dynamics, and social circles eventually reaches a profound milestone. He realizes that the ability to simply exist as his unvarnished, authentic self without apology is the greatest luxury life can offer. Initiating a cold approach forces him to step right back into an auditioning mindset, trying to persuade a stranger of his value. There is a specific soul-deep exhaustion that comes from decades of managing other people's perceptions of you. Retiring from that performance is the ultimate reward of aging. When a man has finally laid down the burden of having to impress the world, you cannot pay him enough to pick it back up just to impress someone over a glass of wine. He would rather sit quietly in the corner, enjoying his own thoughts, than spend 5 minutes putting on a show. The eighth reason represents the psychological core of this entire phenomenon. His self-worth is no longer tethered to female validation, and without that dependency, the underlying engine of pursuit simply disappears. Throughout a man's youth and early adulthood, romantic conquest and female approval serve as major external pillars, supporting his sense of manhood, desirability, and social status. When a woman responds positively, he feels validated. When she ignores him, he questions his worth. For a man who has done the deep internal work of mature living, that dynamic completely dissolves. He knows precisely who he is, what he has survived, what he has built, and what his character is worth. That internal accounting is anchored in reality, not in the fleeting reaction of someone who does not know his name. When you eliminate the desperate psychological need for external validation, approaching women purely to prove that you can still attract them vanish is overnight. A younger man often struggles to distinguish between actually desiring a specific person and merely wanting to feel desired. An older man sees that distinction with crystal clarity. If he ever chooses to step forward, it comes from an authentic, rare appreciation for who that individual is, never from a compulsive hunger to validate his own ego. The ninth reason is that older men understand the full trajectory of what they would be starting, and they are not convinced they want to take on that responsibility. An approach is never an isolated event. It is the first domino in a very long chain. It leads to continuous communication, setting up logistical routines, integrating two established lifestyles, negotiating habits, managing family dynamics, and potentially navigating a painful, messy separation if the connection fails. When you frame the situation accurately, the real question is never should I walk over and say hello. The real question is, am I prepared to take on a complex, multi-month project with a human being whose values, emotional stability, and lifestyle I know absolutely nothing about? When you are 25, Time feels practically infinite, and starting something that might fall apart in 6 months feels like an acceptable cost of living. At 65 or 70, your awareness of mortality is visceral. You recognize that your remaining healthy, active years represent a finite and rapidly dwindling resource. Spending 6 months untangling yourself from an incompatible dynamic is no longer just an inconvenience. It is an irresponsible waste of precious life. Older men protect their remaining time with absolute ferocity. The 10th and most brutally honest reason of all is that the life these men have built without actively pursuing women is demonstrably better than the life they lived while pursuing them. When you look beneath all the social theories, tactical analyses, and psychological nuances, this simple truth stands alone. When men reflect honestly on the decades they spent actively chasing romantic connections, they recognize those years as the periods marked by the highest levels of anxiety, self-compromise, financial strain, and emotional instability. They remember suppressing their own preferences, walking on eggshells, and enduring endless drama simply to maintain a relationship. The life they have constructed in their mature years, centered around personal freedom, genuine friendships, intellectual pursuits, quiet mornings, and emotional sovereignty, is simply superior. It is not free from moments of solitude or occasional loneliness, but it belongs entirely to them. A man who has lived both realities side by side and discovered that independence brings far more enduring peace than romantic pursuit has zero incentive to turn back. He does not avoid approaching because women lack value or because love is not real. He stays where he is because the life he has created on his own terms is far too rich to trade away for an uncertain promise that might only detract from it. That choice is not surrender. It is the ultimate arrival. It is a level of self-actualization that very few young men can comprehend, but one that almost every seasoned man understands in his bones. Take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Have you noticed this shift in your own life or among the men around you? Was there a specific moment when you realized that peace was worth infinitely more than pursuit? Leave your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let us have an honest, unfiltered conversation about modern masculinity, maturity, and the choices that rarely get talked about openly. If you value deep psychological insights into life, resilience, and personal freedom, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking perspectives.